too if I had discovered that.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to, hopefully we'll have a couple more people here join us, but with, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And hopefully everybody can see my screen. And I don't know if you knew it, but we actually have a website for the group. This is it. And this is the presentation today. So I was thinking about it. I was debating about whether or not to do a presentation on Deno or to do one. I was thinking about doing one on Reddick, the caching server. And I thought, well, you know, Deno's kind of interesting because it's something that they just went 1.0. It's a project that was started by Ryan Dahl. It runs TypeScript. It's a server runtime like Node. So I figured this might be a good subject to do a presentation on. So I decided to go with Deno. That being said, let me go ahead and get started. So the first question is, you know, how do you actually pronounce Deno? Is it Deno or is it Deno? And the correct pronunciation is Deno, even though Ryan Dahl himself originally called it Deno. But this is probably going to be one of those things. This could be like, you know, the GIF versus GIF kind of a thing, and nobody's exactly sure how to pronounce it, but the official pronunciation is considered Deno. So that's the official pronunciation. So what is it? Deno is actually, it's a runtime for running TypeScript and JavaScript. And it's built with Rust, V8, Tokyo, TypeScript, and JavaScript. And you can use it for doing things like, you know, creating CLI tools, web servers, web services, microservices, system scripting. Essentially, all the same stuff you can do with Node. You have that capability with Deno. Plus, there's some additional tools that are baked in. They're actually kind of cool, which we'll talk about. And I caught wind of this about 2 years ago. There was a presentation that Ryan Dahl gave at one of the JavaScript conferences about 2 years ago when he talked about some of the misgivings that he'd had about Node. And, you know, he said, what if you go back and recreate everything that, you know, I think everybody's had that where they've had projects they've worked on. It's like, man, if I could go back and change something, or, you know, I don't have the capability of doing it now because I just don't have the bandwidth for doing it, but, you know, I rewrite this or redo this or re-implement something using this, you know, he'd had those thoughts. So I thought it was pretty interesting because he started going into depth about some of the architectural decisions he made into Node and Node.js. So let's see here. So if you're not familiar, Ryan Dahl was the guy who actually created Node.js. He started off thinking about, you know, V8 had just been open source. V8's the JavaScript engine for Chrome. And Google had open sourced that. And I was like, I wonder if I could take that and use that to solve some of these problems that I've had with building, you know, web servers, where I could do things asynchronously a lot better. And so he initially kind of announced it as kind of like a project back in 2009 at JSConf EU. And he was approached right after that to get sponsored to turn it into like an actual, you know, real product. And Joyent, I think, was the company that went to him initially and told him, you know, hey, we'll pay you a salary if you come and work on this full time. And so that's what he did. And then he worked on it for a couple of years, got it to where it was stable. And after he got it stable, I'd say probably like around the year 2012, he decided that, you know, it's like, well, I'm going to move on and do other things. And so he left the project back in 2012. And he actually became kind of interested in doing stuff with Golang. And Go has become a very popular language for reformed Node.js developers. And one of the reasons why he gave for that was that initially when he was working on Node, he thought it'd be a good idea so that everything would be asynchronous, and he thought that would be like the preferred model. But he said he really liked Go's model, where essentially you're writing code, that's essentially synchronous code. But then if you need to do something asynchronous, you can do stuff asynchronous if you have to, using I think Go coroutines. And so he worked. I think he worked at Google for a little while, and he was doing some stuff with Golang. And then I think about 2.5, 3 years ago, he decided to kind of get back into Node and doing Node development. And so about 2 years ago, that's when he made the announcement that he was working on Deno. And I've been kind of watching it from a long distance away, just to kind of see what he's working on, and to see kind of what it turns into. And so I've been pleasantly surprised by some of the things that are built into Deno. So is Deno a replacement for Node.js? And the quick answer to that is no. It's not a replacement for Node.js. But it may be eventually at some point. It may become very popular, and people decide to start using this over other languages and systems. But right now, it's still kind of a 1.0 program. So what are some of the shortcomings in Node.js? Well, one of the things that people complain about Node a lot is that it really kind of forces you to do everything or use callbacks, or at least it did initially. And so, something that's very common is that you'd see a lot of APIs or modules that you could use where you had to use error first callbacks. And so what people started doing is they started writing this code where you have one callback, but then it has to answer another callback. It has to do you wind up kind of creating like these tree structures of just callbacks, calling callbacks, and stuff like that. And there's actually better ways of organizing that. But that became one of the things that a lot of early Node developers came to dislike. And then the other thing about it is that in modules that you're using, like specifically NPM modules, not all those modules are backwards or compatible with the browser. And so one of the promises of Node is that, okay, well, you're writing your applications in JavaScript. It's the same language you use on the front end. Now you're using it on the back end. But unless you do some special tweaking, you can't use all of those modules and stuff on the front end that you're using on the back end. There are some projects and stuff that you can use where you can take a module and then convert it into a module that will work both in the browser and on the front end. But that's one of the things. And then there's other things that Ryan decided to exclude from the original version of Node. So, for instance, like if you're making a server backend, why do you need to have a window object? Well, one of the reasons would be compatibility. If you have people that are trying to write code that glom onto that window object, that'd be a good reason to have the a window object. There's other things like there's no built-in fetch, and you're really kind of dependent on using npm to kind of use to kind of build your applications. So what are some of the Deno features make it kind of unique? Well, one of the things that's kind of neat is that you can write your code either in TypeScript or JavaScript. And so a lot of the front-end frameworks now, Angular in particular, but there's others now where they give you the option. Oclip is an example of this, where when you're going to write your code and stuff like that, it's like you can do it in TypeScript or you can do it in JavaScript. It's up to the preference of the developer. So the other thing that's kind of unique about Deno is that it's not tied to npm. it has a standard core library, which is something that Node never really had. It offers full support for the import and export syntax. So I think we're all familiar with the ES6 versions of import and export, and that's something where there will be a lot of Node applications where you see people are using require, and then there's people that are using import and export, but then they're having to use a tool like Babel as an example to convert that into something that will work on an existing node. And there's the MGS extension, the CGS extension. It got kind of complicated. Deno, it's like everything, it works with import and export right out of the box. There's a website called deno.land. I'll go ahead and open that up. This is the main website for the Deno project. But it's got a pretty good manual in there. There's references for a lot of the standard objects or standard modules that you might be using are all available on here. And they also host third-party modules as well on there as well. But it's not NPM. It's nothing like NPM in that sense. Another cool feature is that it offers enhanced security through flags. So V8 is supposed to technically be inside of a sandbox, so that if you go to execute an application that uses V8, you don't have access to the file system per se or access to the network. With Deno, you have to explicitly give permission to use those features. And I'll show some examples of how to do that here in a little bit. So what are some of the Deno shortcomings? Well, like I said, one of the reasons why I decided to talk about it is that it's a 1.0 product. They actually went to 1.2, version 1.2 this week. But it's still, in my mind, it's still kind of a 1.0 project. A lot of the third-party services that we'd expect to use, like in Node, just aren't available yet in Deno, but they're coming. Like I said before, it's like there's no NPM, so there's NPM it's not a lot of the modules that we use in NPM are not backwards compatible with Deno. And then to do a lot of things that we're used to doing with Node does require a security flag. So that's a plus and a minus. It's definitely it's a good feature to have the additional security, but it's also kind of a minus, because now there's a lot of additional flags that you have to put in if you want to be able to access the network or access the file system. Is it safe to use in production? Well, I don't have anything in production using it, but like I said before, it's 1.0. I'm sure there's people out there that are starting to play around with using it in production. I'm still currently in the playing around phase, so I'm not hosting anything yet that's running Deno. So how do you install this? So with Node.js, it's actually pretty easy to install the application on there because there's installers for all the different operating systems. Right now, the way they recommend you doing it is either using one of the package installers that comes available for your operating system, or you can actually just do an installation through, basically through the command line. So for instance, like if we look at this right here as an example, here's a curl statement for Bash or ZSH, and then there's one down here for PowerShell as an example. You can also use Cargo or Brew to install this, but I'm going to go. Let me bring this over here. Can everybody see that okay? I'm just going to go ahead and run this and see what happens. Live demo. Okay. So I think I already had that installed. I'm just going to do a check. And sure enough, I do have it installed. So we're good to go. And where'd my mouse go? Here we go. So here's
did that install the dependencies as well? And was Node a dependency?
No, Node was not a dependency. So what this is actually doing is it's installing an executable into in my case, I'm using a Mac, so it's storing. I think it's storing to user local bin. And if you don't have it set up, for instance, like there may be some like environment variables that you have to set up for. So for instance, there's like a path variable they want to set up so they'll look for certain things. I'm not going to pull up my my ZSH file, but my RC file, but
so all that did was install Deno. It didn't install V8 and TypeScript, but those were dependencies, right?
Yeah, so it's basically installed the installer for Deno. Deno is an executable. It's got V8 built into it, and it's got TypeScript. And that's actually one of the things that's kind of unique about Deno is that they're building it using Rust, and Rust has this thing called crates that you can use. And what they've done is they've built specific pieces of Deno so that they can be used all on their own. So for instance, if somebody wanted to create another Rust project that used the V8 engine, they've created a wrapper or abstraction with all the bindings in the V8 that you could then use in another application that's not Deno, as an example. So for instance, if somebody wanted to create like a desktop application that used V8 kind of like Electron does, it's possible that you could write that with a crate using Rust. So it's definitely more modular than the Node.js project. The Node.js project is essentially it's a C++ project with a lot of JavaScript in it. But it's a single executable. But just as an example, like if you wanted to do a build of V8 as an example, that's going to take you somewhere between a half hour to an hour, depending on your machine, to build V8. And so what's nice about this is if you want to build on top of what they've already done, you can take a crate for V8 and then just build on top of that. And it cuts down on the compilation time. So this is an example of a pretty simple, this is like your hello world example. The one thing that's a little bit different here than you'd see, like say, in a Node.js application is that I have a type in here. So in this example, we're actually using TypeScript. If I wanted to, I could have just done this as JavaScript. But here I'm actually specifying a type. So if I put a different type in there, like let's say number, for example, that should create a compilation error. Here's an example of a server, and this is actually one of the things that's kind of neat about Deno. So one of the things that you notice here is we're not using like a require or anything like that. We're just doing an import to this standard library HTTP server. So this is their standard HTTP server as part of their standard library. And they're using a destructuring here in TypeScript to basically get the serve function off of that. And then what's interesting about here is that for the initial file that you go to run, it's got a sink built into it at the very top. So if you notice here, there's a for await in here. So each request, essentially, it's waiting on that request. And so you don't have to specify like a main function with a sync, the sync keyword. It just does that for you automatically, at least in the first file. If I was importing another file that had a function in it, it would have to have the sync method or keyword on it if I wanted to use that type of functionality. But in this case, I don't have to do that. So I was talking a little bit before about security flags, and the way that works is that if you're going to run a script or an application you've written, and let's say it needs to access the net, you could do --allow-net. And you can also even make it a little bit more fine-grained where you can specify either like a specific port or a specific domain name. So in this example right below here, you can see that we're specifying api.google.com. So if your application tried to access any say network resource outside of that domain, it would throw an error. There's also -- allow write, -- allow read. So if you're trying to read or write to the file system, you can specify that. You can also tie that to a specific directory or path on your file system. There's also the capital A or -- allow all, which basically turns all the security off. I'm not going to do that, but that's one of the features. And there's also, if you need to access any environment variables, you can do that using the -- allow environment. There's already, I was surprised, there's actually a bunch of frameworks and stuff that are already available to use with Deno. There's one that's pretty popular for building websites and web servers called Oak. If you're used to using Express and want to continue using Express, there's one that's called Opine. Lodash is supported. Moment.js is also available as well. Redis, if you want to use Redis for your caching. So there's actually a lot of stuff that's already built in. There's a pretty good database module that you can use as well for accessing most of the database systems. Package managers. So right now, there's no default package manager like there is for Node. There's no NPM, for example. There's also no package.json file that's required for your applications. And so it's actually, I think it's a little bit neater as far as you don't have, let's say, if you go include, let's say, certain projects or include certain modules from NPM, they may have modules that they require, that have modules they require, and you can wind up with these huge tree structures, directories that may take up, 500 megabytes just to install the packages and stuff like that. But if you're looking for code that you can run, obviously you can go to deno.land. There's this one I hadn't seen before called pika.dev. I'll pull that up. And you can go in there, you can do a search. There's also jspm.io. That's another one they recommend. So there's no node modules folder, which is actually kind of neat. Whenever you either have to include the module you're using into your source code itself, or you can make a URL reference to it, like we saw in one of the previous examples. And in that case, what it'll do is it'll take that module and it'll bundle and cache that module into your cache folder. And so on the Mac, the way you get to that is you get to your home directory /library/cache/deno, and you'll find all your modules and stuff will be cached there. But it might be, like, for instance, one of the reasons why Yarn was invented was because they didn't want their build server going out and pulling all this stuff down from separate servers. If you just want to include it all in your source, you can do that as well. I was talking a little bit before about some of the tooling. There's actually some really neat tooling that comes along with Deno. So some of the stuff is still kind of beta, but like they have a bundler that's pretty nice. They also have built-in testing. The linter is one of those things that's kind of beta. They have an install tool, which will let you take an existing Deno application or JavaScript application and install as like a command line utility. They also have this thing called Deno Info, which will let you look at the hierarchy of modules. So if you are including a module and then it's including a module, it'll show you the hierarchy of what that looks like. And they also have a formatter. So if you want to go in and format your code, you're too lazy to do it yourself, or use a prettier extension like in VS Code or whatever, they have a tool that will format your code for you, which I thought was pretty interesting. So Deno test, the way that works is that it looks for files that have a test in the name. There's a regular expression they use that will look for like .test or _test. And then what you do is you just say Deno.test, specify the name of your test, and then you supply it a function for actually doing your test. Now, when I first started working on these slides, like I said, 1.2 just came out. The cert module, which they had in their documentation for doing your test, there was a bug in it and it wasn't running. So I actually included an assert library and the sample source code that I did for this talk, but they fixed it. It works now. But I thought that was interesting. That's kind of an example of some of the 1.0 stuff I'm talking about, is that there's going to be bugs and stuff that you come across with some of this stuff. Deno install, like I said before, one of the things that's kind of neat about this is that you don't even have to have the code locally on your system. You can specify something like this. This creates in this example, it creates a file server. And if I come over here as an example, and I tell it that I want to install it, I want to access or have read access permissions and allow net permissions, what I'll do is I'll go out and it will grab this file server example and run it on port 8080. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. All right, so now if I come in here, I say serve and come back here. I just created a file server. Neat. Another feature that is people have been asking about has been WebAssembly. And there's actually pretty good support for WebAssembly because WebAssembly is actually supported through V8. And a lot of the modules now people are writing for Deno, or like if you're adding, like have an add-on module you want to use that has like a lot of native functionality. What a lot of people are doing is they're writing that in Rust and then including that as a module. And there's a neat project I'll show you guys here in a minute for taking Rust code and then running it, or being able to run it inside of Deno. There's also a project you've probably heard of before called Inscription. And so one of the things that some people have done is there's a SQLite module that's also been added to Deno. And that's essentially, SQLite, it's actually a C library. And so what they did is they took Inscription and they transpiled the C application for SQLite into WASM. And now they're just loading it up as a module inside of Deno. So it just runs as WASM code. So what if you want to deploy this to production, right? So probably the easiest way to do that is going to be to do like a Docker container with your application. And so that's one way you can do it right now, is you can deploy Docker. A lot of the existing services, like for instance, like Heroku, if you go to try to upload a Deno application, it doesn't know what a Deno is. They have built-in support for PHP, for Node, for Ruby on Rails as an example. So if you do want to run Deno or a Deno application on Heroku, there's a build pack that you can use. And I just saw the other day that Vercel, the company that's formerly known as Zeit, they've got a pretty cool hosting platform. And they actually will let you deploy your Deno applications as a microservice on Vercel. So it is possible to host stuff out there, but it's going to take a little bit more work than you're probably used to. Like I have a lot of stuff that I've just gone and hosted either on Azure or Heroku or AWS, and there's pretty good built-in support with those cloud services. for just deploying Node applications. But this is one of those things that I think we're going to run into if you want to do anything with Deno right now, because there's not a lot of broad support for the different cloud providers. So that I'm going to do a Deno demo or a demo. All right. Hopefully everybody can see this. I'm going to blow this up a little bit. Can everybody see that okay? I'll take that as a yes.
I love VS Code.
Yeah, you can see VS Code, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a couple different things here I was going to try to demo. One thing I'm going to try to do is demo some of the features here. So I showed how to install Deno already, but let's say you want to go to an upgrade. Well, upgrading to a newer version of Deno is pretty easy. You just go here, Deno, upgrade. And it'll check to see if you have the latest version. If you don't have the latest version, it'll let you install the latest version. If you want to run an application that you've written, so for instance, like we did the Hello World here example, and this is one that's using TypeScript. And there's probably here people that are a lot better at TypeScript than I am, but I think it's just cool that you can run TypeScript. And so, with Node, you can just say Node and then whatever the file name is. But in this case, there's a whole set of tooling that goes along with Deno. So in this case, I'm going to say Deno run and hello.ts. And there just ran this hello TS file. And there's another example here I did where I'm actually using a module here. So this module is actually moment.js, or in this case, moment.ts. And if I come here and I say Deno run index.ts, it's taken a timestamp and it's actually put that inside of here. But what if I wanted to, look at some of the modules or see what the module hierarchy looked like inside this file? I could also come in here, I could say Deno and info index.ts. And this shows me what language it's written in, where it's compiled to, and what the hierarchy of the different modules are. So you can see that this moment.js is just a wrapper around the moment.js, as an example. And then if I wanted to, I can come over here, I could say Deno bundle, and we'll say index.ts. And there it's created a bundle for me. All right. So one of the things I like doing, like I know Brady likes doing there's an example app I've seen Brady do a couple times where he'll use like biorhythms, an application that shows you what biorhythms and stuff look like. The one I like that's my kind of personal hello world is something I call dog ears. And so, anytime I learn like a new language or a new platform or whatever, I like to take my dog ears algorithm and rewrite it in that language. So in this case, this is the JavaScript version of this function. And what this does is it takes the dog's actual age and then their weight, and then it'll tell you how old the dog is in dog years. Like if it was a human, how old it would be, right? And I took that and I refactored that into essentially a TypeScript function. So here you can see now I'm taking in parameters. I'm not specifying an output type here, but it's going to return basically a float. So if I come over here, I want to test this, see what this looks like. I can come over here and I can just say Deno test. And the way that works is I have this dog ears test. And what I've done here is, like I mentioned before, the search library had a bug in it initially. And so I took the original version, I modified it so that it would work, but they've since fixed it. So now I'm just including it in as part of the standard library. And here I have two modules that I'm importing in locally. One's this dogears.js, and the other one here is this dogears.ts. And then I'm just going through and I'm running through and testing using a couple of assertions, just making sure that whatever's returned from this function equals this this number. And you can see that works. And if you want to do a web server as an example, so I have that HTTP serve that I did before. Let me show you that. This is the example they have on their website for doing an HTTP server. And this is what I was talking about before, where there's a built-in sync in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say Deno run HTTP serve. Actually, that is a TS. And if I hit enter right now, what do you think will happen? Is this going to run if I try to run this?
It'll run and then see the async. You don't have to do anything about the async. Do you have to do anything about it quitting prematurely? I don't know. Unclot permission. Oh, you gotta allow that. Yep.
That's right. So one thing I can do is I can come up here and I can say allow net, and this will work. But I can also come over here and I could say
localhost or something.
8,000, an example.
48,000. Okay.
Yeah. And now if I go back to the browser here and I type in it's just waiting for each one of my calls. Now that's pretty simple. That's a pretty simple example, but I think what's a little bit nicer example is, let's say if you actually want to do something with routing like you would with an Express server. And so I have this oak sample here, which is an example of kind of a hello world. But one thing I decided to do was whenever I take that dog ears function and then apply that to a web service. So here I'm taking in oak, bringing in the application, the router, and then I'm setting up routes for just regular slash, which sets up the default value. And then I have one that actually takes in parameters here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say Deno run, say allow net, and dog ears server.ts. Now if I come back to that.
Oh, you got errors. You got errors.
Oop, what was my error?
Type URL is not assignable to type string. So somewhere in your code, you've got a type, you're getting a type error.
Yeah, so most likely what happened is last time I ran this, they updated one of the libraries. So you can see here, I'm not specifying a specific version of Oak. I'm actually using whatever the latest version of Oak is. So I need to go back and debug that later. I'm not going to do it right now, but there's another Oak server. Let's see if the other Oak sample will work. Let's do this. Deno run.
I see those error messages. I don't see the line number though. Oh,
Well,
there
it looks
it
like
is.
it's coming from inside the path, right? So there's a reference here to the standard 0.59.path.
Got it. I see. So it's down within one of your dependencies.
Yeah. Yeah. So like I said before, I'm not going to try to debug it right now. Oak sample.ts. And let's say allow net. All right. That's the same thing. So yeah, there's definitely something going on in the Oak framework. Maybe it's time to start looking at Opine. All right. Well, that's okay. I've got another one I can share you. So one of the things I also like doing is my free time is a little general aviation flying. And one of the things you have to check on when you're flying around general aviation is you got to know what the weather's like, right? Especially in the summertime, there's a lot of thunderstorms and whatnot. And so I had this this little application here that goes out, gets the weather, and tells me what the weather's like. So what I can do is I can come over here and I can type in Deno run allow net, and we will say get avwx.js. And this tells me what the observation time was, what the temperature is in Celsius, what the dew point is, what direction the wind's coming from, and how many knots, what the visibility is, what the altimeter pressure is, and the flight category. What that means is whether it's visual flight rules or instrument flight rules. And then also, in this case, it's giving me a ceiling and stuff like that. And one of the things I can also do is I can pass in parameters into this. So if I want to put a different airport in here, let's say like JAX as an example, I can type in JAX and then that gives me that. But one of the things I thought was pretty neat about, we just kind of showed it before, where you can just kind of point to another Deno program and then run that as like a command line where we created a serve for basically looking to see what is being hosted inside a specific folder. I'm going to take this application and turn it into a command line application. And all I have to do to do that is come over here and say Deno install, and I'll say -- allow net, and say dash name, and we'll say, we'll call this avwx, and get avwx.js. Let's see if it lets me install that. Okay, so now I just created this AVX utility. So now if I want to, I can come out, I can say avwx. And now I have a tool I can run anytime I want inside my terminal to figure out what the weather is. And then if I want to say, take a look at the weather in Miami as an example, I can say avwx KMIA. And now I've got the weather in Miami. If I want to look at Tampa, and now I've got the weather in Tampa. I've got all the different cloud heights in there, what the weather's like. So actually, today looks like a pretty good day for flying. Maybe I shouldn't be here. All right. So any questions?
No, I'm intrigued. What's the next level? I mean, I'm interested in this Express kind of capability. I mean, I'm looking for a GraphQL server, so it looks pretty primitive, or you know what I mean. And we're yet to see the brilliance.
Yeah.
In the coming weeks, right? With additional modules that really, you know, demonstrate Deno and with extended capabilities. Yeah,
I think where a lot of the power in this is really going to come from is actually it's going to be people that are trying to write TypeScript and JavaScript code that will be truly kind of like kind of cross-platform between the browser and the server. And like I said before, like one of the problems, like for instance, like in Deno, if you go to the REPL as an example, and I say Deno REPL, now I'm in the REPL, and if I want to, I can say something like window. And there's actually a window object. There's no window object in Node. So it's possible, a lot of the things that we're used to having in the browser, for instance, like basically if we want to add an event listener or something like that, it works very similar to the way it does in the browser. So I think one of the things that's going to be, I think, alluring to this is people that are, like, for instance, like a lot of people that are using Angular, for example, they may be attracted to this because, Angular now, if you're using the newer, more modern versions of Angular, technically you're supposed to be doing that in TypeScript. And, if you're doing Vue.js development, as an example, Vue.js, gives you the option of whether or not you want to use TypeScript or you want to use JavaScript. Oclip is the same way. Oclip gives you the option of doing, in fact, the preferred way of writing Oclip is using TypeScript. So I think that's one of the places this will be kind of popular. I think
How about behind Electron? Has Deno found a home behind Electron yet?
Behind a what?
Electron.
Yeah, so that's one of the things they're actually promoting. So with the crates, the one thing that is pretty intriguing, I didn't really show this, is that it's very easy to add on or to basically take modules they've created and then kind of wrap your own applications around the existing modules. What I'm saying, like, for instance, like their V8 engine, like TypeScript has its own wrapper that they use as an example. So I think that's one of the places where we'll start to see projects and things that are built around kind of like the internals of what they built for Deno. So people could build something like an Electron type of application. So yeah, one of the things I didn't show, which I think is pretty cool. Let me see if I can pull this up here real quick.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a pretty key capability, right? Is that ability to stand on the shoulders of giants, meaning that as more and more complex functionality, if there's an easy way to package that complex functionality instead of always keeping it as primitives,
yeah,
to create components or create Electron apps that, all of a sudden the ability to build applications of higher order components is awesome, right? You don't always have to be down at that primitive level. Oh, okay.
Let's see here.
You had to define exit first before you can exit.
Well, no, I think there is actually an exit you can use, and maybe like .exit or something like that. But that's kind of example. Like you have all that destruction capabilities all built into it. Let me see if I can find. Let's see here. There was a tool that I just down. Oh, I know where it is. It's not in here. It's in my Rust folder.
What's your? I mean, I'm not a Rust developer, but what's your preference? Is Deno just still, still too early? But it seems so.
I wouldn't host anything on it right now. I mean, there's some side projects that I'm working on where I'm using Node for all that stuff. A lot of the tooling and stuff. I was just really curious to see what it was because if you get a chance, watch that talk that Ryan Dahl gave 2 years ago at one of the JS conferences. It's on essentially talking about if I 10 things I got wrong in Node. And one of the things he talks about was like there was a push very early on in Node to put in promises in a Node, and he kind of fought against it. And then eventually did make it into the node. And more importantly, like all the functionality behind async and await is all based off of promises, right? So like when you do an await on something, it's really a promise that you're doing an await on. So, so anyways, there's this project here, and so let's do cat feed me. All right, so what this is right here, I'm going to open this up so we can see what this looks like. So this is actually a project that will let you take Rust application that you've written. So they have this Rust application here. And what this example does is it actually takes the Rust build system, and you can configure it so that what it'll do is it'll create a WASM package here. So this essentially is something that you can now import into your Deno application. And I guess potentially you could also into a Node.js application because they have a package.json file here as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and see if I can't run this here. Let's do SSVM up. And we're going to target Deno. So what this did is it actually used the Rust build system to actually convert and build some WASM files. So now if I wanted to, I could come over here, I could say Deno test and say Deno, see if I can do asterisk. Nope, that doesn't work. Oh, because I didn't do allow read. And there, oh, I also need to do allow net.
Allow net. Yeah.
So here it's going through a test and it's showing me I've got all this different WASM stuff here. And so I'll run this. Let's go ahead and just run this and see what this looks like. All right, so now if we come back to the browser and I say, let's go to localhost 8000. I've done this hello world, right? Not very impressive, but here's what is impressive. So right here, we go and look at this, this module. They have this function here that takes in a string, and then it creates a new string. And then here at the end, they're just basically taking the parameter, adding it to the end of the beginning of it here. So this is pretty simple as far as what this function is doing. But this is a Rust function, right? And this is all compiled native code running on the processor. So now what I can do is I go here to the server example. What they're actually doing is they have this method here. So they're going in here to the package functions.lib, right? We've got this package functions.lib, and there should be one that's exported out for the say somewhere in here. There it is. So here's the function that's actually creating the WASM and then creating a function that we're now exporting. So now in our server code, all we're doing is importing that function in here, and then every time somebody requests the server, it's going to take in parameter, and it's going to say hello world. So not super complex as far as what they're doing. It's just a hello world application, but you can see half of it's actually written in Rust and half of it's written in TypeScript. So I think that's actually kind of a pretty cool, one of the things that's pretty cool about it that you can do is it's got really tight support with Rust. And that's the thing that I thought was interesting was that when Ryan originally started developing this, I believe he was using Golang to actually write the main pieces and stuff. Like he wanted to use that over C++, and then so I think somebody convinced him that it's going to be a lot easier if you just use Rust for the whole thing. And there's a library on the C++ site called libuv, which is the way that Node is kind of doing all the synchronous stuff, all the thread handling. It's using that library to do all that. Well, there's a Rust library for doing that called Tokyo, which is very popular. And that's what they're actually using internally inside of the Deno executable to actually handle all of the asynchronous type of functions. So the thing about Rust is there's a bunch of different libraries that do that. They just went with Tokyo. So I guess potentially if they wanted to, they could use a different one that's more performant or has better memory management or something like that. But I think that's one of the things that's kind of interesting is that initially he started writing this in Go, and then they went back and they rewritten the whole thing so that it runs in Rust. So that may make an interesting future presentation. If anybody wants to do a presentation on Rust, please let me know. All right, let me see here. Back to the slides. So any questions? Does anybody want to present on something next month?
Good luck. I'm trying to think of anything I've got that's exportable. There's a lot of stuff I'm internal with the Bank of America, but I think.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, Brittany, are you working from home or are you working in the office?
At home.
Okay. All right.
So yeah, my days run together.